Here is a detailed chapter-by-chapter summary of how to change your mind, what the new science of psychedelics teaches us about consciousness, dying, addiction, depression, and transcendence by Michael Pollan. Introduction: A New Door in the Wall. Michael Pollan opens with an exploration of Aldous Huxley's experience with mescaline and how that early literary and philosophical interest in psychedelics faded following the cultural backlash of the 1960s. He introduces his own skepticism, but also his growing curiosity about the apparent revival of scientific research into psychedelics. The introduction sets the tone for a book that will blend personal narrative, scientific investigation, historical context, and philosophical reflection to examine how psychedelics might change not only minds, but also scientific paradigms. The History. Chapter 1. A Renaissance. Pollan traces the early history of psychedelics in Western medicine and culture, beginning with Albert Hofmann's accidental discovery of LSD in 1943. He describes the initial excitement among psychiatrists who believed LSD could be a powerful tool for exploring the unconscious and treating mental illness. The chapter recounts how psychedelics were widely researched in the 1950s and early 1960s before becoming politicized during the countercultural revolution. The backlash led to a decades-long ban on research, effectively freezing a promising scientific field. Pollan charts how interest has quietly returned in recent years, with a small group of researchers initiating what is now being called a psychedelic renaissance. Chapter 2. Natural History. Be Mushroomed. Here, Pollan shifts from LSD to psilocybin, the active compound in so-called magic mushrooms. He investigates the ethnobotanical and anthropological history of psilocybin, tracing its use in indigenous rituals, particularly among the Mazatec people of Mexico. The chapter details how Westerners first encountered these mushrooms in the 1950s, leading to sensationalized media coverage and, ultimately, the mainstreaming and subsequent criminalization of their use. Pollan reflects on the role of R. Gordon Wasson in this transmission, and critiques how traditional knowledge was often exploited in the process. The chapter also begins to foreshadow the modern scientific interest in psilocybin's therapeutic potential. Part 2. The Science. Chapter 3. The Trip Treatment. This chapter focuses on contemporary clinical trials using psychedelics, particularly psilocybin, to treat end-of-life anxiety in terminal cancer patients. Pollan visits NYU and Johns Hopkins, where volunteers describe profound mystical experiences that alleviate their fear of death and induce a sense of unity and peace. He speaks with researchers like Roland Griffiths and Stephen Ross, who explain how such experiences, often framed in religious or spiritual language, can be induced in controlled conditions. The chapter suggests that psychedelics might one day become part of mainstream palliative care, not because they dull sensation, but because they allow patients to reframe their existence and mortality in radical ways. Chapter 4. Travelogue: Journeying Underground. In this personal narrative, Pollan begins experimenting with psychedelics himself. With a mixture of apprehension and excitement, he seeks guidance from underground therapists and guides who administer psilocybin, LSD, and 5-MeO-DMT in informal but structured settings. The chapter is as much about preparation, set, and setting as it is about the actual experiences. Pollan describes sensations of ego dissolution, timelessness, and unity with nature. These accounts are deeply introspective, but remain grounded in a journalist's skepticism. He also addresses the issue of legality and the ethics of underground therapy, where experienced guides continue the work that legal restrictions have forced out of sight. Part 3. Chapter 5. The Neuroscience: Your Brain on Psychedelics. This chapter delves into what science currently understands about the effects of psychedelics on the brain. Pollan interviews neuroscientists such as Robin Carhart-Harris, who use brain imaging techniques to show how psychedelics reduce activity in the brain's default mode network, DMN. The DMN is thought to be associated with the ego, self-referential thinking, and habitual mental patterns. Its temporary suppression allows for novel connections between brain regions, which may explain the feelings of unity, ego dissolution, and increased openness. The chapter presents the idea that psychedelics do not simply stimulate the brain, but rather free it from entrenched patterns, allowing new forms of perception and cognition. Chapter 6. The Psychology, How to Change Your Mind. Here, Pollan focuses on the psychological implications of his experiences and the research. Psychedelics appear to increase mental flexibility, emotional openness, and a sense of interconnectedness. This can help individuals break out of rigid patterns of thought, such as those found in depression, addiction, and anxiety. Pollan explores the ways in which these substances appear to interrupt the rumination loops characteristic of many mental health conditions. He also reflects on the importance of integrating these experiences with therapy or reflection, highlighting that while psychedelics can open the door, lasting change requires conscious effort and meaning-making. Part 4, Chapter 7, The Spiritual Experience. In this chapter, Pollan wrestles with the metaphysical implications of psychedelic experiences. He explores whether the spiritual revelations reported during trips are merely neurochemical illusions, or if they reveal something more fundamental about consciousness and reality. He interviews philosophers, religious scholars, and scientists who debate the nature of mystical experiences and their authenticity. Pollan remains agnostic, but suggests that regardless of ontological status, the experiences themselves can be transformative and healing. He compares them to dreams, symbols, and myths, powerful, real in their effects, and potentially redemptive. Chapter 8. The Trip Treatment Revisited. Pollan returns to the clinical setting, focusing more deeply on the enduring changes reported by subjects who had undergone psychedelic therapy. Many described their experiences as among the most meaningful of their lives. He explores how these transformations often involve a profound shift in perspective, away from self-centeredness and toward a broader, more interconnected view of existence. Pollan also considers how psychedelics challenge conventional understandings of mental illness, suggesting that some disorders are less chemical imbalances than failures of meaning, connection, and narrative coherence. Psychedelics, then, might be tools for repairing not only chemistry, but also story. Conclusion: a new kind of medicine. Pollan closes by reflecting on the journey he and the field have undergone. He remains cautious about hype and mindful of the risks, but also hopeful that psychedelics may one day be integrated into the practice of medicine and mental health in a safe, regulated, and meaningful way. He acknowledges that while psychedelics are not panaceas, they offer a rare and powerful means of confronting fundamental questions about the self, death, and the nature of reality. Their true promise may lie not in the molecules themselves, but in how they expand our conceptions of mind and healing.